This is an unbelievable event to launch our anti-trafficking initiative. We've had such wonderful people, our abolitionists, New York's new abolitionists, from all media, from industry, from politics, from the arts, from the clergy, announcing that we have to stop human trafficking, labor and sex trafficking, and we have to do it now.
When you traffic a human being, you can exploit that person over and over and over again and make $250,000 a year on the body of a child.
Trafficking is a subject that many of us have been working against for a very, very, very long time. So my first thought is that I'm grateful that it's now a public issue. People are understanding that it's almost as big in terms of profit as arms and drugs. It's a huge abuse of human rights, trafficking for sex and for labor.
Hi, I'm Jessica Minhas, and welcome to Work With Me. This is the second show for us on trafficking, and we promise we'll make it a good one with some great tips and some easy, digestible ways for you to get involved. I am so excited to have our two guest panelists with me today. I almost called you guys hosts because I, again, have just known them for so long, and they do incredible work. So first we have Jonathan Walton. He is the director of InterVarsity's NYC Urban Project, and he's also the director for the We Log Off movement. And I can't wait to talk more about that. He's an author, he's a speaker, and he's a spoken word artist. Is that what you call it, a spoken word artist?
Yes, that's absolutely right.
Okay. I tried to convince him before to do maybe a little spot, but he's not keen on it quite yet, but we might get there.
Yeah.
Eventually.
We'll see.
At the end of the show.
I might escape. I can't help it.
And we also have Allison Trowbridge. She is a partner with Just Business, also a Renaissance woman, author, speaker, producer, and among other things, just working tirelessly, both of them, in the anti-trafficking movement. Now, last week we spoke a lot about sex trafficking, and you know, when we talk about trafficking, usually that's the type of trafficking that gets brought up. It's the one that's for lack of better terminology, it's the sexiest to talk about. But the other sort of main body of trafficking is the issue of labor trafficking, and that one's a little harder to kind of break down because it's something that we don't think about when we put our clothes on in the morning, when we put our makeup on, for us ladies at least. Jonathan, you're excluded from that. Or when we are looking at our phones, when we're talking about the minerals and the things that go into the supply chains. But I thought it would be really interesting for our audience especially to kind of have a conversation around your purchasing power and how you can be a part of the solution. So what is labor trafficking? I know, Allison, you've worked in this space for a very long time along supply chain, and you're doing great work activating young people to be part of the solution. Mm-hmm. What is labor trafficking? When people ask you, what do you say?
I mean, it's so interesting. One of the things I've been most grateful about is the way that slavery has really hit the public consciousness recently. I think finally society is recognizing this is not only a massive issue, but it is one of the greatest human rights issues of our day. So you have the international traffic in drugs, the traffic in arms, and the traffic in human beings as the top three. So
but when you say traffic, you're actually referring to the black market of crime.
I'm referring to the whole gamut. So any person forced to work with no pay beyond subsistence, who basically cannot walk away. That is the question we always ask, is can the person walk away? And when I started working on this issue, human trafficking was considered the number third largest crime on the globe. Now it's considered the second. So
the second,
only
behind
the trade in drugs.
Right.
So trafficking in drugs. So, but many people, the thing that's wonderful is now it's hit the public consciousness, but most people, because of the media, really understand it in kind of a narrow sex trafficking perspective. They think that modern day slavery looks like the film Taken. However, the majority of slavery today is somewhere between 80 and 90% actually is labor trafficking. So these are everything from from children who are caught in generations of debt bondage in India and South Asia. These are kids forced to pick vegetables in the fields of our own country here in America. These are, children or adults who are mining the mica that goes into our makeup, who are picking the cotton in Uzbekistan that is going into all of our clothes. So it's an issue that I think society hasn't understood yet how closely it touches all of our lives.
And how does it touch us here in New York?
Yeah.
Because you've done so much work here locally.
Right. I think one of the biggest things when someone says, like, what's human trafficking, especially around labor, we have to make it really, really small and concrete for them. And so the first thing that I usually do is I say, take out your phone, right? Because most of us, like, we never consider. Like,
Okay. I got my phone.
You can take out your
Okay,
phone.
let's talk about it.
And we
What-
start asking, like, well,
Okay.
where'd the
Tell me.
case? We look at it and say, well, where do you think the case came from, right? And they're like,
Yeah.
well, I've never thought about it. It's like, oh, well, like, who put the screen on? Who cleaned it? Right, like how does the battery keep going? There are minerals, there's manufacturing, there's all this stuff involved. And then, because most of us just think of ourselves as consumers, whereas for me specifically, like with the log off movement, we say we're supposed to be stewards, not consumers. Right?
Stewards, not consumers. Can you break that
I love
down for
that.
me? What is that?
Absolutely. So instead of me thinking, how can I, like, for the least amount of money as possible, get the most amount of stuff for myself all the time at the expense of everybody else? That's what consumption is. There's nothing positive for the person on the other end about consumption, right? But if I'm going to be a steward over the time, talent, and resources that I have, I want to ensure that every single person along the supply chain of my life has the opportunity to flourish as much as I do. And so if I'm thinking to myself, how can I not contribute to exploitation but actually invest in freedom, that's where the conversation starts, right?
Sorry to interrupt you one more time, but that just makes so much sense to me. How can I contribute to, say it one more time for us?
How can I invest in freedom
Okay.
and not invest in exploitation, right?
Wow.
Love
With
it.
every purchase that we have, because that's what we do with our money. So we talk about in our culture, like, empowering consumers. When what we've actually done is by calling people consumers, we disempowered them. Because consumers it's unintelligible. It's not. It's an assumed unintelligence. Like, I'm just gonna take as much as I can for myself. When in reality, what we're actually supposed to do with our time, our money, and our resources is to steward it in such a way that the kid that put this together in China, the boy in the Congo that got the coltan that keeps the battery going, the person who pressed the screen into place in Rochester or designed it, the reality is, like, what if they had opportunities to flourish the exact same way I did? Right, to have a phone. Not that all of them need phones, because that's actually not the answer. They should actually have the option of flourishing the way I do in the United States, and other people who are able to stand in line for hours and hours to buy these things, right? And so we try to bring it home for people. And so when people ask me what labor trafficking is, I try to bring it home. And then give them, like, just a tidbit. Whenever someone is exploited, for sex or labor, they're being trafficked, right? And they're like, oh, okay.
So, and exploited, that's like a pretty big term that's tossed around as well.
Yeah.
How do you describe, because you're working with teenagers
Right.
who have this huge purchasing power, so how do you define exploitation, or someone is being exploited? How would either of you guys define that?
Well, when I'm talking with a teenager, I think to myself, would you work in the factory that the person who put this together would? If you had a choice, would you work there? And they say, no, I'd never work there.
Wow.
And if I talk with a parent, they say, no, I'd never send my child to work there. Then I'm like, okay, then, how do you treat that person halfway around the world or around the corner in Chinatown with the same respect that you treat your own child, the same respect you treat your own family, right? Because if that person doesn't have the choice to have a flourishing environment, then they're being exploited for the labor or for sex that's going on. So that's what I usually say.
And just to go over the actual statistics, thank you, just to go over the actual statistics of what we're talking about. And these numbers tend to change a little bit depending on which governing body is sort of putting them out. And that's just the innate problem with trafficking as a whole. It's hard to put numbers to it because it is such a black market, backroom, very sophisticated crime organization. But what I have in front of me, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's about 21 million people are victims of forced labor, 11.4 million women and girls, and about 9.5 million men and boys, which again is hard to say for sure.
And that number does fluctuate up to about 32 million, the estimate. So
yeah, and that's the number that I had heard most recently.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
I don't
yeah.
remember who was that.
I think, ILO is a little more conservative, but
The
32
ILO
million
is the International Labor Organization.
Correct.
32 million.
comes from a study that was done from the by Kevin Bales that he led through the Walk Free Foundation, which was done this year. So that's, I think, the most recent citing.
Walk Free is just another anti-trafficking organization.
Correct.
They're working in both sex and labor, but tend to focus more on labor and supply chain and what we can do to be part of it, which is, and we'll get to the type of organizations that you can get involved with if, in hearing this, you're kind of inspired to want to try and do something to stop exploitation and to stop this from happening. Almost 19 million victims are exploited by private individuals or enterprises, and over 2 million by state or rebel groups. That would mean state or rebel groups are sort of the people that are doing, is that like child soldiers or?
Yes.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, exactly.
and also when you talk about the longest running civil war in the Congo, right? So the bloodiest conflicts since World War II goes on in the Congo, run by warlords, right?
And that's going on right now.
Right now.
Still happening every day.
Every day, right? 98% of the coltan, bauxite, tantalum, tungsten that is coming from that conflict, right? So it's in every single phone, effectively, that we have in America.
And that's where we get terms like conflict minerals, or you may have heard of conflict diamonds or blood diamonds. Those are regions in which the conditions are such that humanity is being so severely exploited.
And so we're talking about the Congo, but I've heard the statistic, correct me again if I'm wrong, please, that it's about 50% of the world's slaves are actually in northern India.
Yes. So
Which was shocking for me to hear.
By the
Yeah,
numbers,
yeah.
yeah.
South Asia predominantly, and India. The Dalit communities have historically and presently had extreme issues of slavery. So many people exploited, as well as child labor. And in India, you get systems of generational debt bondage, or what the UN likes to call collateralized debt bondage.
What does that mean?
It means a man who is struggling to pay for food for his family might go and get a $3 loan, literally a $3 loan from a businessman in the community. And that business owner says, okay, and you're going to sign this paper right here that says you're going to pay that back. The man doesn't know how to read or write, and so he signs and has signed on to interest rates that he can never pay. And so instantly he and his family are all forced to work for this business owner. And we see generations of 3-4 generations on still working at the same brick kilns or different mining communities or what have you, in horrific conditions. And oftentimes those end up as kind of some of the very base elements that go into the products that we buy.
So that's like your great
Imagine,
grandfather and
your great-grandfather taking a loan, and you are still working as a slave to pay off that $3 loan with no vision of an exit.
Right. And that's where I think when someone says, oh, I want to fight trafficking or understand it, when you look at the population in India, the caste system, there's systems that have been set up that actually make this type of exploitation possible and enable it to keep going. Right?
Walk me through that. What is, so for our audience, I really want it to be boiled down so that somebody in Brooklyn or Queens or Staten Island is like, oh, okay, I get it. So you're saying, what does that caste system even look like? The caste system that perpetuates this type of slavery?
Do you want to break down the caste system?
I mean, to say
Very succinctly,
okay, so let's say it's like Jason from Queens.
Right.
Okay, Jason from Queens put into the caste system in India. So Jason is born into intergenerational slavery. And Jason is what? What are his parents doing?
Jason's family has been systematically oppressed for generations. So he's part of this lowest class, the untouchables, right? And so his class of people has been considered slaves, will be considered slaves
Cannot
for
exit.
perpetuity. Like
Correct.
that's what the expectation is. So let's say that Staten Island represents like
Exactly, yeah.
these people. So anyone from Staten Island steps in, like you're always going to be put in that box, right? And so there's never upward mobility, a chance for him to move to Manhattan.
You can't marry up
You
either.
can't
There's
marry,
no American dream,
Absolutely
there's
not.
no-
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And that, so there's familiar, like when you talk about marriage, right? Like, because that would be a way that we would think, oh, well, if I, you know,
could
was
exit.
married or get into a different family,
Yeah.
that doesn't happen. Like, you don't marry across class. In strict Hindu culture, that's something that's very looked down upon. So the reality of being that, like, you know, this isn't something that he could work really, really hard and get out of. This is a system that he's a part of, and the only way that there's going to be some transformation in his life and in his family's life is that there's a systemic change, right? That would actually free hundreds of people at a time, which is something that IJM does. Or when it's one person usually controls a system, like a brick kiln or a Bengal factory or something like that.
Every time I've been in anti-trafficking work now for the past, I think, since I was 19, and I'm 31 now. So
12 years.
Right. Moving on. So, and I'm still, every time I hear these stories, I'm still like, how does humanity do this? Like, I don't understand how people can own people. And we're talking about domestic work, we're talking about agriculture, construction, manufacturing, and entertainment, all forms, including pornography, dare I say it. I said it, pornography. And so it's, you know, it just baffles me. Do either of you have any personal stories of either working in the field where you've seen freedom happen, or even here in New York? You know, people like to think that trafficking happens away from us, but it happens here in our backyard. It happens in Chinatown. It happens in Staten Island, where our mystical Jason is living in a Dalit community.
It's true.
It happens in Queens. It happens in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You want to tell a story?
Well, I think for this audience, I mean, I would just so love for us to move beyond the limited viewpoint of modern day slavery as being something both that happens over there as well as something that is only sex trafficking. And you know, if a teenage girl is to run away on the streets of any major city, so New York City, the likelihood that she'll be approached by a trafficker is pretty much 100% that it'll happen within 72 hours. And this is not, you know, what we think of as a slave driver. This is, you know, a guy who is sees an opportunity and a vulnerable girl and you know, romances her and convinces her that he's her boyfriend, and then convinces her to, you know, you got to start helping to pay the rent, and you're going to start seeing these guys who are friends of mine, and now I need you to start seeing guys who, you know, neither of us know, and it becomes this ongoing process of manipulation. And I think what we don't realize is we always want to think of that person as looking like us or talking like us, and we don't realize the people that we just walk straight past on the street who are in situations of vulnerability. The most common cause of vulnerability is lack of economic opportunity. The reason why people, whether in forced labor conditions or in sex trafficking, end up there is because they don't have a job. They don't have, you know, they don't have a way that they're able to pay for a livelihood, and so they say yes to dangerous options. A lot of what we see, if you look overseas in Southeast Asia or in what's called the rest of X system in Haiti, is you see families literally selling or giving away their children because they cannot afford to feed them. And so they think they're giving them a better life. They think that child will be educated. They think that child will be able to send money back home. And they don't have the education, resources, economic power to be able to see the dangers of the situation. So I think realizing the role that economics plays in all of it, and then I just keep going back to, you know, we have this Hollywood vision of what slavery is, and we don't realize that it's, you know, we touch products every day that are connected to modern day slavery, and that we live in a global economy in which the people at the very, very lowest rung are exploited because of the way that the markets had functioned, and that as consumers, I think the greatest calling of our generation is to reverse those negative cycles, change this race to the bottom to a race to the top, and start to, create opportunities, as you said, for everyone to flourish within those supply chains.
Yeah, like exactly what she said. There's a framework that we use called PI, and so poverty plus isolation equals exploitation. And so, take for example, there's a kid that I met. I'll call him Jason. We use Jason. Except Jason didn't come from India. Jason came from China. And so we were running a program in Chinatown in 2010. I looked across my students and I was like, I don't recognize that guy. And come to find out that he and his friend had been trafficked from China. And he had seen my students praying in different parts of the neighborhood and mapping different places where sexual or labor exploitation might be happening in Chinatown. And he decided to tag along. And one of my international students who was from Nanjing started talking with him, and then he ended up coming. And she sat beside him and translated all of my talks for him. And so he ended up being a part of our program for the next 2.5 weeks. And the story that he shared of, getting on a plane from Fuzhou, southern China, being flown to Brazil, then put in the bottom of a boat from Brazil to Mexico, then riding in the bottom of a bus to Chinatown, and then coming out and being stuck in a restaurant where he had to work. And I'm thinking to myself, all of my students are buying food at the restaurants in Chinatown. Who's pouring their water?
Wow.
Who's the young kid that's pouring water, not saying anything, right? And so then he started to introduce us to his friends. And so come to find out, there's a bunch of these boys sleeping in an arcade downtown, because you don't have to pay for a hotel. You could pay $5 and play video games all night, but that's where these boys are sleeping.
Wow.
Right? And so that's a reality for this kid, So we were able to help him, and he's actually in.
I'm stunned by that story. That's unreal. That I'm speechless.
Yeah.
But how do you go about helping him? What were the actual next steps? I mean, for our audience, we're at a restaurant, we're at a nail salon, we're just somewhere, and we see somebody with the signs, and I would love to talk about what those specific signs are. What do we do next? What did you do in this situation?
I can explain it much more succinctly now than I could then, because I was just like, I don't speak Chinese. Yeah, right. But we go 4 Ps, okay?
Okay.
So the first P for us is prayer. Like, just understanding, I'm not the Messiah. I don't know how to fix this. I'm gonna do the best I can with what I got. Like, I need to understand that I am not the savior kicking in doors.
So this is not taken?
This is not taken,
Okay.
1, 2, or 3. Right? This is, I need to recognize my own limits and embrace them so that I don't hurt someone. Because most of the time what we do is we're trying to do what's best for ourselves, to not feel guilty, to not feel ashamed. We have another framework of guilt, shame, fear, obligation, anger, and wanting praise for ourselves. That's usually why we do things, right? As opposed to...
I feel like I should be writing this stuff down.
I know.
Oh my gosh, guilt.
Guilt, shame, fear,
Okay.
obligation, anger, and praise for ourselves. And so go serve others for a purpose, right? So that's the acronym that we use there. But it's one of the things that...
Did you make that up? That's pretty good. Okay.
That's awesome.
There's a lot of it. But specifically for this guy, Jason, we would pray, and then we would partner. Because after you pray and say, I'm not the answer, you can actually look up and say, who are the people who can help me? My wife is Chinese and Korean. She can translate for me. So I call her. Our church that we were going to at the time has many Fujianese speakers there, so I can bring him there, right? So I partner with other people who are doing these things already. The next thing is purchase. He needed shoes, so we went and got him shoes. He needed clothes, then we were able to get him a job, right? We have to invest our time and our money and our talent in a way that actually ensures ensures freedom and doesn't invest in exploitation. And the last one is policy, right? So we want to pray, partner, purchase, and shape policy in such a way that this doesn't happen. Why is it okay for this kid to be trafficked here, right?
Yeah.
Like, why is that all right? So what policies play into that? And so there are de jure policies, like things that are law, but then there's de facto things, like cultural, like it's okay to pay a loan shark in certain places around the country to smuggle people here. that's not okay, right? But culturally, some people that's all right, you know? And so what does it look like for us to have meaningful relationships with people so that we start to reverse some of those trends?
Yeah.
So that, because culture doesn't change by a law changing, it changes through relationships, it changes through conversations, it changes through people getting to know each other, because the systemic transformation that we're looking for actually comes through personal and relational transformation first, which is what we don't want to work at, because that stuff's hard.
And it takes time and it takes a lot of energy.
Yeah, like I have to have conversations. I have to, you mean I have to go there? I have to sit and eat their food? I
Yeah.
have to feel uncomfortable when I don't speak the language? Like, we don't like to do that. Like, in our culture, we're allergic to being uncomfortable. Being uncomfortable is bad. I need to fix that. So let me just give money or do something, like buy a red t-shirt and I'll be good, right? But that's not the invitation to do justice. The invitation to do justice is to get dirty.
So we need,
And
okay,
yeah.
so we need to get our hands dirty, is what you're saying.
We do, absolutely. They're already dirty. We need to get them dirty in a different way.
Yeah.
And we only have a few more minutes left. Unfortunately, this has gone by so fast. We have 2 minutes left. Okay, I need to know, what can people that are watching, what can they do about this?
Well, first of all, I just want to say, if you think that you know someone who's trafficked or are in a situation of exploitation yourself, there is a hotline that you can call, which is the National Human Trafficking Hotline, which is 1-888-3737-888. 1-888-3737-888. And what you were saying about policy is so interesting, because I think so much has changed in the last 15 years around policy. Ever since the Trafficking Victims Protection Act in the United States. I mean, 15 years ago, if you were a teenager in prostitution, you were considered a prostitute. Today,
And a criminal.
Yeah, a criminal.
Yeah.
A criminal. Today, if you are 16 in prostitution, you are considered a victim of human trafficking. If you are under 18, you are a victim of human trafficking.
And we have a ways to go with those type of laws. That's another reason why we're saying get involved with policy, find out who you're voting for, what they're all about, and get your hands dirty, right?
Absolutely. And then I think recognizing, you said profit. One of the ways that we just day in and day out have power as consumers is the way that we buy. So purchasing from companies like The Gap, which owns Banana Republic and Old Navy, that are working to rid their supply chains of any sort of labor exploitation, that is actually making a positive vote with our dollar and saying we're going to support the companies, fair trade companies, ethically made clothing and food items. That's the first rung of supporting ethically made items.
What are some websites that we can go to? There is justbusiness.is.
Just Business, that is.
And also welogoff.com. That's again, welogoff.com and justbusiness.is. Thank you guys so much for joining us on this conversation around labor trafficking. We hope you become a part of the solution and get your hands dirty. I'm Jessica Minhas, Allison Trowbridge, and Jonathan Walton. Thank you guys so much for being a part of this conversation.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.